So welcome everyone very, very excited to the book launch of Shohams Bangle by Sarah Sassoon. So I am Ilana Steyn, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm head of education of the Academy, and Sarah is a longtime faculty member of the Academy of Jewish Thought and Learning. The fact that she is in Israel and not in South Africa has not held us back, and we have had Sarah teaching for us in the last year or two on subjects that we will be touching on as well today. So very proud, very excited that one of our faculty members or yet another faculty member has gone into print, and we're excited to have this conversation now with you, Sarah. So what I'd love to say to everyone else is, please, if you can, put your screens on. This is, something that it's a connecting space here. This is not a lecture necessarily, but one where we are talking personal stories, personal ideas, personal histories of Sarah, as well as maybe other people on the screen. So it's great, fantastic. Those of you who've got your screen on, obviously, if you're wearing pajamas that clash and you wouldn't rather not, that's okay. But we'd love you to all put your videos on. Thank you. Okay, so on that, let us begin. Sarah, I'm going to let you begin with telling us a little bit about yourself for a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you, Ilana. Thanks for having me. The Academy is very, very close to my heart. I love everything you do, and I've been very privileged to teach courses with the Academy. And maybe I should start by saying that the Academy kind of is one of the things that also helped me connect academically to my roots. My background is that all my grandparents are from Baghdad. My father was born in Baghdad, and it's a strange thing. I was born in Australia, but my grandparents were all from somewhere else, and they spoke Judeo-Arabic, and I was fed Iraqi food, Iraqi Jewish food like mahashem, bamya, kubba, and it was all very normal for me to eat. And yet I didn't really know their story. And when I was in South Africa, I got married to a South African. I moved to South Africa, and the Academy was launching. And Maureen Kendler was actually Zechrono Livracha. She said to me, "You should teach." I said, "But I'm not really a teacher." She said, "Of Tanakh." She said, "No, you need to teach." And so everyone was choosing their books, their Tanakh, and I chose Ezra and Nehemiah, which are the prophets, the scribe and leader. They were the leaders who led the Jews of Babylon. They helped facilitate the move to Judea with the building of the Second Temple. And my family, being Iraqi, it's Babylonian. So that was really wonderful to develop these courses comparing the return from Babylon to Judea to the return of the Iraqi Jews to Israel in 1951, which is what my book's all about. So yeah, that's my background.
Fantastic. And so you now live with your family in Jerusalem?
Yes.
And have been developing your craft, I think, in terms of writing both poetry and now as well as a book. So is this a story? We're going to hear more about the story itself, but just before we get there, sort of, is this part of all your life? You've been hearing some of these stories, and who from, or is it something that started, later on in your life?
So I think stories have always trickled down, and I was blessed that my grandfather did write a couple of books with my cousin. So I do have his stories in book form. I think sometimes the stories we're born into are part of our DNA. So actually, I joined a wonderful poetry group in Jerusalem, and suddenly in the poetry I was writing, and I'm not a poet, but this is the beauty of writing. I really encourage everyone here to go out and write, because when you write, even if you don't consider yourself a writer, something in you comes out that maybe didn't have a chance before. And through writing poetry and taking it seriously, suddenly I had stories about my grandparents. And suddenly these stories were important. And that began this exploration through my writing of my Iraqi Jewish background. As I said, there was a lot of silence about the story. They didn't really say, this is what we did in Baghdad. They just did it. And now as I'm doing my research, I'm saying, oh, I grew up with that. So for Pesach, for instance, they used to dress up the children. We used to be dressed up by my grandmother with a scarf and a scarf of matzah tied to our back. And we were dressed up like the Israelites. And they would march us to the table and we'd have to say these words, which only now that I've researched, I've got them in Judeo-Arabic, which is like, where do you come from? And we say, we come from Egypt. And they're like, where do you go? And we say, we're going to Jerusalem. And that's part of the Seder tradition of all Iraqi Jewish families. So when I researched them, I'm like, oh, but I did that, but it wasn't explained to me. So that's kind of my process.
Okay, and so you decided to, or what jump-started you really to write this story now?
So the truth is, I've got this bangle. I don't know if you can see it. It's from my grandmother. It's an Iraqi bangle. And everyone who knows any Iraqi woman has a lot of bangles. So growing up, cooking with my grandmother, being my grandmother, the memory of her is always have bangles. And, you use your hands a lot as a mother, as a cook, so her bangles were always going. And I knew I wanted to write a story about this bangle. And I sat down one day finally, and it just came, this story of Shoham with the bangles. Shoham's actually named after my aunt, who's called Sue in English, but her Arabic Jewish name is Shoham. And this story just came, and it became a deeper story, not just about bangles between a granddaughter and a grandmother in Iraq, but more about the story of what happens to them.
Right. So that's amazing. So there really was a flow through, really, I guess you could say, to get to this point. But let's ask the question, why a children's book? It's quite a tough, well, we'll hear just now when you read the story, but it's not an easy subject. It's about leaving a home, being forced to leave home, etc., and yet you chose to do this as a children's book.
Right, it's a great question. The truth is, once it was published and I realized, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to talk about this book and describe it, I was like, this is a book about refugees. How did I end up writing a book about refugees for children? And I realized that, wait a minute, children also need real stories. This is a very real story, and this happened to children. My father was 5 years old. My aunt was 7 years old when they left Baghdad. And the truth is, we live in a world where the reality is not simple. Kids are hearing about Ukrainian refugees. Refugees is a part of the reality, unfortunately. And it's a terrible thing that this book is still current, that this story is still current. And something I realized why it is a children's book is because it's not just about having to leave a home, but it's about relationships. And it's about remembering where you come from, even if you do have to leave. And one of the big themes in this book is family and being together, and which is a very big Iraqi theme and a very important one. One of the reasons we chose to do this, Ilana, was because today marks the day of the expulsion of Jews from Arab countries and Iran. It's an official day that Knesset called. So really, thank you all for being here for this day. It's an important day, because this is a story that hasn't been recognized since 1951. Only in the last years it's being spoken about more, and the Mizrahi Jews are finding their voice. They're telling this story, and this story is super important. And hopefully in the presentation I'll be giving after the reading, we'll be explaining why is this story still important? Why is it important to remember Baghdad and Iraqi Jews? Because as Jews, we do look back, but the main thing we do is look forward. So I feel this book does look forward as well.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I think then this is the correct time for you to read for us.
Yeah, I'm going to read the book, which is really fun. It's one of my best things to do. Let me just pull it up.
And just by the way, you will be able to buy this book, or you can already buy this book on Amazon. And those of you in South Africa will be bringing it, or it will be coming through to Kollel Bookshop
over here at the back, you've actually got the author's note, which explains that my grandparents were on this flight, just like Shoham was, along with 120,000 other Iraqi Jews, obviously not on the same flight, but there was a huge airlift movement from Israel called Operation Ezra Nehemiah, after those prophets I spoke about before from the Bible. And you can see my grandparents here, and there's Shoham in the corner right over there. And that's actually my dad right over there. And you can see that this is a real family photo, and they have a baby, and they left with the one suitcase, just like Shoham. And that's the family story I grew up with. The only difference is that the airport story is a bit different in my family, and maybe I'll share the airport story now, and then I'll go on to my presentation to explain a bit more about the day and also more about what Shoham left behind. What is she remembering exactly? Because I think that's the saddest thing of all, that we've lost a whole world, and that world is Babylonian Jewry. And that's what I'm trying to recover. And at the end, I really would like to speak about what the legacy is. So just to share a personal family story of Shoham. So it's my Auntie Sue. If you met her, you'd understand how a little girl of 7 could do what she did. They were at the airport with their one suitcase, and at the airport, they actually divided the men and women. So my Auntie Sue was with my grandmother, and they were checking everyone's hands, earrings, for jewelry. They really weren't allowed to take anything. They let my grandmother, I think, take a wedding ring. And they saw on my Auntie Sue's finger a ring, and she had refused to take it off before. She had wanted to take it with her to Israel. And what happened was that the airport officials, who were women actually, checking them, said to my grandmother, "How can this little girl have this ring? Why did you let her?" And they were angry. And so Sue took off the ring and threw it at them. And that's the story that I grew up with of the airport. So you can imagine that did go very deeply. Unfortunately, they did not think to bake their jewelry into pita bread. I haven't heard of anyone who has. But now everyone
How old was your aunt,
She was
Sarah, at the
7.
time?
She was 7 years old. So that was, yeah, her story. So should I go on to the presentation, or are there questions? Go straight on. Okay. So I'm going to squiz through this. If anyone wants more information, they can do my course with the Academy sometime if we run it again.
So just before you start, Sarah, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
just to mention sort of how we're going through is that we've spent time now on sort of the personal element and really where Sarah comes from and where she gets to writing this book. But now we're going to spend time on the broader side of the story, which is the history in general, and specifically it makes sense to do that today, which is officially it was named in Israel in 2014, I believe. The government announced this day to be called the Sephardi Refugee Day in Hebrew in Israel, and it is about the refugees, and this is what we're going to hear about, that had to leave the Middle Eastern lands to come to another land in the Middle East. So,
okay, so what we're talking about, and maybe after this presentation you'll understand the loss, because if you look at this map, you have 946,000 Jews living in these 10 Islamic countries. And I'm going to name them because today marks their departure and their expulsion from these countries. We have Jewish communities, very rich, old Jewish communities in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. These are old communities, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll get a bit of a taste of what Jewish life was in Iraq, where my grandparents and family for generations come from. 2,600 years of history has disappeared from these countries. And what was it that made the population go from this number to this number in 1968, 136,000, to in 2020, this number, 14,000 500. And I don't think Iraq should even have a person there, or even half a person, because there's only 3 Jews left in Iraq today. It's something, when I think about it, it's like no wonder that the Mizrahi voice is now being heard a bit more, and the Iraqi stories are coming out a bit more, because you can't lose 2,600 years of history and culture and family story in less than 70 years. So there is a big Iraqi population in Israel, and there are many wonderful Iraqi authors here, but they're mostly in Hebrew. So I'm really happy I was able to bring Shohams Bangle out in English and start to get this story out. So how did this happen? Basically, today's the 30th of November. Yesterday was the 29th, which is the year that the UN declared the partition plan. They announced the founding of the State of Israel as a Jewish homeland. And that was a wonderful day in terms of establishing Israel. But suddenly, the Jews in Arab lands were under threat. Suddenly, if you were a Jew in Baghdad, you were suspected of being a Zionist, and a Zionist enemy and traitor. 5 Arab countries declared war on Israel, including Iraq. So there you were a Jew, and suddenly you were identified as a Zionist. And as I go through the presentation, we'll see what happened. But just a brief going back to the fact that Iraq's a new concept. It's a new country relatively. It's Babylon we're talking about. When we talk about Iraqi Jews, we're talking about Babylonian Jews, all the way back to the times of the First Temple. With the destruction of the First Temple, the community was properly established in exile from Judea by King Nebuchadnezzar. We know about that. And then with the destruction of the Second Temple, it really became the bed of Torah learning. We have the Babylonian Talmud, we have the period of the Gaonim, and that is where Iraqi Jews come from. If you ask an Iraqi Jew, well, I once asked an Iraqi professor, are you an Arab Jew? And he said to me, I am a Jew from an Arab land. I am a Babylonian Jew. And it's a very big distinction for them, because they're even the Baghdadi dialect of Jews are older than the ones that the Arabs speak. So the history here is super rich, and it's something I'm always happy to go into in super detail. However, tonight I'm not going to do that to you. We'll go through this. I want to just give you an overview of what Baghdad was. So for example, if you lived in Baghdad, you'd sleep on your roof in the summer. It's pretty different from anything any of us know, I think. All the roofs were flat. Actually, here with the triangle roofs in Shohams Bangle, it's actually a bit of an error, as my aunt pointed out to me when she saw the book. She said to me, she saw the book and she said, Sarah, you don't know anything about Iraq. And I'm like, yes, so teach me. And she spent hours of me letting me interview her. But one thing I do know about Iraq is that the palm trees were everywhere and dates were rampant, and there were houses on the Tigris River. And this boat here was called the Dahur boat, which you'd actually stand up in, and it would transport people and it would transport produce. And life revolved around the Tigris River. There were coffee shops where men would sit at. Women would not sit at coffee shops. Men who were Muslim, Christian, and Jewish would sit together and drink tea more than coffee, funnily enough, and play sheshbesh, discuss politics, do business. That's very much part of a Baghdadi Jewish life. Over here, you can see just a narrow street of Baghdad. You see how old it is. You can see the traditional dress. The Jewish women used to wear an izar. This is a typical picture of what it was like. This was taken in 1925. I think what's interesting here is that modernization had already reached Iraq. Iraq was established in 1921 by the British under the British mandate. They wanted to make Iraq kind of independent, in inverted commas, and they appointed King Faisal from the Hashemite dynasty to be the king. And modernization was very important with the development and the creation of the modern day Iraq. And King Faisal was very close to his Jewish advisors. Over here, you've got the famous Sasson Esquel. I said his name all wrong. It's very hard to know how these names are pronounced, and my Arabic's terrible, I have to be honest. And you have him sitting with King Faisal. He was the first finance minister of the modern state of Iraq, and he actually is known still today for selling petroleum to the British at the gold standard rather than the sterling standard, saving Iraq millions. At the time, it wasn't so obvious to do that because the sterling was strong, but he got paid in gold, and that saved Iraq basically and made them millions. And he's still known for that. You've also got Senator Menachem Saleh Daniel. Why is this important? To show that the Jews, first of all, Baghdad was a third Jewish in 1914, I should say that. That's a huge amount. Baghdad shut down on Shabbat due to the Jews being traditional and keeping Shabbat. Commerce closed down completely. They were the leaders in agriculture, in railway, in running the railway, in running the post offices. With the English coming, their language was very good because Jewish schools were established in the 19th century already. So they were already educated to take up these positions, unlike a lot of Muslims. And here are the Al-Kuwaiti brothers. They were the most famous musicians and singers in Iraq. They composed music that's still sung today in Iraq and the whole Middle East, except without their names because they were Jewish. And once they left Israel, their names were erased from their songs. So just to give you a bit to understand that when you think about Jews in America today, how integrated Jews are in America, it was the same in Iraq. It was the same in Baghdad. And just to share some personal stories, this is my great-great-grandfather, Chacham David. He was the rabbi in Kirkuk. In Kirkuk, there was the term of Daniel the prophet. And that's something else I'd like to point out is Iraqi Jews are very connected to the Bible in a very real way because the prophets are buried there. So you've got the tomb of Jonah in Mosul. You've got the tomb of Yechezkel, Ezekiel, next to Hila. You've got the tomb of Ezra the scribe, which I'll get to just now, which is where my grandmother grew up, and that's what her father was in charge of taking care of. And this is my great-grandfather who was a doctor. My grandfather wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't be a doctor because by the time he wanted to study medicine, World War II had broken out, and there were already quotas on Jewish students at the universities for medicine. So this is Al-Uzair. It's next to the Tigris River, very close to Basra, and that's where Ezra the scribe is buried. You can visit it today, and it's still there. It's run by Muslims and taken care of and revered by Muslims. And this is my grandmother and grandfather. As you can see, they're dressed very modern, very beautifully, and that is what Iraqi Jews are very proud of. They really were very they were well off. There was obviously the strata that was poorer. In fact, I interviewed 2 Iraqi women today, and they came from the poorer sections of Baghdad. And what's interesting, and maybe I'll say it now just in case I forget, is for the poorer Jews to leave Iraq with the Aliyah, it was easier for them than the ones who came from the upper middle class and higher classes, because life in Baghdad wasn't easy if you were poor. Life was better still in Baghdad than Mabara, but I thought that was very interesting today when I was interviewing these 2 women. And over here, down here, you can see a British soldier with my great-grandfather, Youssef, who was the caretaker of Ezra the scribe's grave. And you can see they're wearing the sidara there, which was a traditional hat introduced during King Faisal's time to make a split, to kind of define modern Iraq and from the Fez, the Turkish Fez. They wanted to create this idea of Iraq being modern and different to Ottoman rule. It was a time when they were establishing what is it to be Iraqi. And for King Faisal, it was very important to have Jews, Muslims, and Christians living together in harmony. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing that inspires me when I look at Iraqi Jewish history. But it's not a picnic, all of it, but this is. The Iraqi Jewish food is definitely wonderful. The thing I love about this picture, and if you think about Shohams Bangle and the way she would have cooked with her grandmother, it would have been like this. They used to sit on takhta. You can see these women are wearing modern clothes. This is modern women for the time, but they're baking traditionally together. You can see the different generations. Iraqi cooking is super time consuming. So I cook sometimes, and I make like a lot of kakat, for instance, you can see down here, and baba tamar, but it takes time to make. So just know, if you ever go to an Iraqi household, you're offered any of these special treats, know that a lot of time and love has been put into it. I grew up with this, not knowing how special it was. I always took it for granted that I'd go to my grandmother and we'd have some busak and we'd have all the food, because that's what she did all day. She cooked all day. That was her greatest pleasure, to keep her family together and feed us all. And this picture I chose to bring because I just love the idea. This is the Laura Kaduri School, the Allianz School in Baghdad. It's a dance performance. I thought this is a special photo because it's so modern. It's so not what you'd expect in a Muslim country. You forget sometimes that these are Jews living in an Arab country, in a Muslim country. There is a bigger social context, and it's definitely something I explore more when I teach this more deeply. But this is just a very happy photo of children dancing, and you can just imagine the parents in front watching. And just to show that when we speak about history, and Shohams Bangle is history, we're talking about real people with real stories and real memories. And this picture is someone's memory out there of dancing at a school concert. So I really wanted to bring that. Then I couldn't do Babylonian jewelry without the Chachamim. And one of the things I discovered in my research this year, and this is going to sound ridiculous to most people, is that the man in the front row, in the middle, the wider kind of man with a long white beard, that's actually my great-great-grandfather, Chacham Moshe Chaim Shamash. Babylonian Jewry were always known for their rabbis and their scholarship. And the Chacham Bashi, he was the Chacham Bashi between 1918 and 1923. That's the chief rabbi of Iraq. It was a position that wasn't just about halacha and teaching Torah. It was a position of being a link between the government and the Jewish community. It was a Jewish representative. Don't forget, this is a country that values religion. A Muslim values a Jew who is religious. And that's also why the Jews in Iraq, it worked so well, because everyone had a lot of deep respect for each other's religion. Like after Pesach, your Muslim neighbor would come and bring you pita bread, because they knew that for the last 7 days, you couldn't have chametz, you couldn't eat pita, you were eating matzah, and they would bring you fresh bread. So it's very interesting to always consider the Chachamim, and it's also part of my research to read the laws they make, because that also gives us an indication where the community was at. And this is another photo of my grandparents, their children, before they made the Aliyah to Israel. So why, if life was so good, why did they leave? And there's one word, and this is why it's important for, especially today, why did they leave? Why do we call it an expulsion? Why do we call it refugees? I personally was not told that they were refugees growing up. They didn't say we were refugees. They didn't look at themselves that way. Because, and this is a good question, why didn't they? I think that's like a whole nother personal essay I need to write, and a whole topic to discuss another time. But I wasn't brought up being told we were refugees. The signs were there though. The trauma is there within my family, if I'm really, really honest. What happened? In 1941, I'm just going very briefly through the main markers. There was a Farhud, which was a violent pogrom. What happened was that the Pan-Arab nationalists gained power that year in Iraq, with the Mufti of Jerusalem, by the way, with his influence. And there was a massive mob massacre, 179 official names. I found 180th. I found someone whose name wasn't on the list, and I gave it to the Babylonian Heritage Museum as another name even. And 600 unidentified bodies are within this mass grave. So there were many more killed. There was looting. It left a very big scar on the community of what could happen overnight in Baghdad. and all over Iraq. The Farhud took place also in Al-Uzair. My grandmother's father had to take the whole family on a boat. They had to go on the boat and escape on a boat while they watched their house being ransacked by the mob, but at least they escaped. Today, though...
Sarah, sorry,
Yeah?
what year was this?
1941. So it was
41,
during World War
okay.
II, just to give context. Please ask any questions or tell me if this is boring, and to stop, I can quickly squiz through the rest. But I have to speak about the Farhud today of all days. Just that what is really lovely is that the two Iraqi women said today something that was really interesting. They said any Iraqi Jew you meet was saved by an Arab. And I thought that was just such an interesting way of putting it, because the truth is everyone has a story of being saved by an Arab neighbor. So it's not an illusion that there were good relationships, but sometimes a small percentage of hate can cause a lot of destruction, as we'll see. So, as I said before, 29th of November, with the UN vote in 1947, things got really bad. My grandfather describes how, with the shutters down, with everything closed, they listened to the radio for the vote of the founding of the State of Israel. And with that vote, something happened to the Jews in all the Arab countries. Their whole reality shifted. They were suddenly suspects of being Zionists, and a lot were arrested, as you'll see with this picture. I think this picture of Daniel Baruch here captures also emotionally what happened at the time for the Jews. The sudden fear. Jews in civil positions lost their jobs. They were boycotted. And another big scar, just like the Farhud, this was really a big shock and scar, was the hanging of Shafiq Ades in September of 1948. He was a very well-known businessman in Iraq, one of the wealthiest, and he was accused of being a Zionist spy, and his relationship with the regent and his money, all the money in the world, could not save him from being hung. And he was hung in front of mobs. He was walked from, there was no reason to walk him, but they walked him like a walk of shame to the courthouse, where he was given those fake judgments, and accused of being a Zionist spy, and he was walked to the gallows with the cheering crowds throwing food at him, cursing him as a Jew. He was hung as a Jew, and you can imagine what that was like for the Jews of Iraq to see him in the newspapers, accused of a Jew, a dirty Jew, a Zionist Jew, a traitor Jew. They were also accused of being communists. Communists were also very much the official enemy of the Iraqi government. So life became precarious. And what did the Jews do? They began smuggling out very dangerously over through Iran. My cousin's father did that, and it was very dangerous. So then what happened was that so many were being smuggled out, the Iraqi government came to an agreement with Israel for many reasons. One of them is monetary, to allow the Jews to leave. They were told that only 10,000 would leave, but with the Tusket law passed in March 9th, 1950, which allowed them to leave, but they had to give up their citizenship. It was called a laissez-passer. They had to just leave everything behind and not return. 120,000 signed up, and then the Iraqi government put the last knife in the back of their Iraqi Jews, and they made another law freezing all assets of anyone who signed to leave the country. And suddenly these Jews were left with nothing. And when they left, they were allowed one suitcase, just like it says in Shohams Bangle. And this is an example at the Iraqi Museum, of the Babylonian Museum in Or Yehuda, of an example of maybe what they would have taken, this big suitcase. And they were allowed 50 dinars, which isn't so much money for a whole family. So that's how my grandparents left Iraq, both sets. And they arrived to this in Israel, the Mabarot. And Noah did such a beautiful job capturing it. And the Mabar as a whole topic in and of itself. It's a very interesting topic. And I could go into more detail, maybe just to say the two women today were really cute. They were children in the Mabara, and they really loved growing up. And that's something I've heard, that the kids enjoyed the Mabara, but for the parents, it was a very difficult reality for so many reasons, which I don't think we have time to go into, but feel free to ask questions. So the question is, for me, like, what is Iraqi Jewish life today? As a second generation, third generation Iraqi, you know, there's this wonderful group on Facebook called Mishma and Sfat Iraqi. It's like the keeping the language of Iraqi, and they post pictures of all different things, food, Judeo-Arabic. And this photo was there of what the Alliance Israelite Universal School looks like today in Baghdad. And you can see it's been ruined, it's been graffitied. That's what Jewish life in Baghdad is at the moment. There's nothing there anymore. But what we do have as Iraqi Jews, and I think that's what it was for Shoham to move forward, was to learn new Hebrew words and learn the Israeli way of life, which is what my father and his siblings did. They were very much Israeli Iraqi children, but they're singing Israeli songs, but at the same time preserving their own Iraqi values, which was very much family. So I brought this photo of me and my boys. I've got 4 boys, and we were making mahasha, dolma, that's like stuffed vegetables. And it's very, very labor intensive, but they like helping, and it was really fun, and they love eating it. So I think that for me is the value that I was brought up with, to be with my kids and create a family that love being together and their Jewish identity, and singing the Iraqi songs, which are more than just songs. They're songs that were sung in Babylonia. So that idea of family is something that I really wanted to portray in Shohams Bangle. And I feel that despite everything my family went through, that's what they focused on. And maybe just to add, the other thing that I was discussing with Ilana the other day is that another thing that Jews from Arab lands carry with them, and I also carry it with me, it's a strange thing. When I'm at university, I'm doing my master's, and I'm with Arab students, and I feel an affinity to them, that we can discuss the same food, the same language, and more than that, the same mentality. The Middle Eastern mentality is the same across the board, if you're Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. And that for me says that we can live together. I relate to them. I go into the old city and I feel like if I just, into the Arab Quarter, if I just turn the corner, maybe I'll see my grandmother. So there's a lot more that we share, coming from a background where we used to live together. The first Iraqi novel was written by a Jew. So, you know, we're part of each other's lives. We're part of each other's story. And one of the things I love in my research is when I see Arabs speaking about their Jewish neighbors that used to live there. And there's a grief and there is a missing. And it's still there, and it's not that it's lost. Iraq raised its voice for a second when it said it also wants an Abraham Accords. And I'm sure most of the people there would. They want their Jews back. They don't want that school looking the way it does. They want Baghdad built and vibrant like it was when the Jews lived there. That's what they call the golden period. That's what I read in my research, because I also look up Arabic Instagram and everything. I want to see what's going on in the world of Iraq, because that's what I relate to. So I saw that was their golden period. So, and some of them say, if only we could go back to that time. That's why it's important to remember, because we have Israel now, but we have a lot more work to do to connect to our Arab roots and know that we can live together. So yeah, thank you for listening to that long presentation.
No, thank you, Sarah. I think that was wonderful to just really build that picture that goes behind the book, you know, sort of behind the scenes, one could say. And I think what you've given us as a sense, and you and I have discussed this, and I've heard it also elsewhere, is that as you said, the sort of the Farhud happens in 1941, right? This pogrom, really, but it's in a language that most of us who come from Ashkenazi, I'm saying the people that come from Ashkenazi Europe, everything is covered over by the Holocaust. And so, and we're not ever discussing who suffered more, because that's a very Jewish discussion, which we're not going to have.
I had this discussion
just
today.
To say, though, that I think
I just have to tell you that these two Iraqi Jewish women today, one of them said, they were describing the Ma'bara, and they said as young girls, they didn't understand the crying at night from the Ashkenazi tents. And she said, of course, they had to take care of them first. Of course, they had to remove them from the Ma'bara at first. She describes one of the women going crazy, hitting the children because she was from the Shoah. And this woman said, of course, the Shoah was so much worse. And I think, you know, a lot is said about the way the Middle Eastern Jews were treated in Israel. And I think it's a whole nother discussion, a whole nother presentation. But I will say this, that we had each other as families. And even though worlds were left behind, and it was a trauma, my mother's mother lost her son in a Ma'bara. And I think that trauma, she never recovered. Those are the traumas. But then if you look at the Shoah, you can't actually, there's no comparison. And I think every honest Jew from an Arab land knows how blessed they are that they got to come with their families. So, and that's just the reality. She said it. This Iraqi Jewish woman said it with a lot of passion in my interview with her today. I was very interested in that she said that. And she's right. She's 100% right. And we can have both stories. And I think that's what today is about. It's about saying we need both stories, just like we need all the Jews in Israel and all the Jews in the rest of the world. We need diaspora Jews, we need Israeli Jews, we need Ashkenazi Jews, we need Sephardi Jews, and we need the Jews from the Arab lands. And that's what this day is to say, that we also can have a voice. And a big thing is also culturally, I think, and Yosa over there, I can see him and I appreciate him being here. He grew up in a Ma'bara and he's Iraqi. And correct me, Yosa, if I'm wrong, but as an Iraqi Jewish woman, I wasn't brought up to speak and tell our story. This isn't what I was brought up to do. I was brought up to be in the kitchen and have another 4 children, which is really nice. My grandmother had 8 children. She did a great job. And you know what? I sometimes think maybe the foundation of the world is on people like my grandmother, not on people like me. But so I think that's another.
Yesh for yesh.
It's another reason the story hasn't come out more, and maybe also because I'm English-speaking Iraqi, which is also a bit of a minority of a minority of a minority. I am. Well, in Israel, it's a lot more spoken about. It's a lot more present.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, the Middle Eastern woman is not meant to be standing up in front of a camera. They're meant to really be behind the scenes, preferably behind a abaya. So there's a lot of different calculations when we discuss the Mizrahi story and the Ashkenazi story.
Absolutely. But I think as Carmen said, we need all the stories, and we do. And that's why it's great that there is a day, you know, that we're talking about. And also, I think something like a children's book, and that while it is, yes, about a refugee, it's more than that. I think what you brought through from it is more than a story of a refugee, which can be a very negative, obviously, you know, there is that sort of side to it, but you've done it in a very gentle way that I think brings the closeness of the family together, and some of the traditions just gently into it, which I'm sure, you know, therefore it's going to take its place, I think, in children's works that will help children to understand the stories. They don't have to wait till they're however old we are. You know, to hear these stories. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. I don't know if anyone has any questions, perhaps. I've seen lovely comments. Thank you, everyone, for putting your comments there. Any questions or comments? Yosa, I'm not sure if you would like to add something.
First of all, it was very nice to hear all our history here in Israel, in English, and the presentation was wonderful. Also, the painting is really close to the time it was. Like if you see the airplane, this is exactly the airplane my parents came with. So my parents came here in 1951. I was born 2 years later. So I was born at the Ma'abara. I grew up in the Ma'abara for 3 years, but I was born in one of those tents you have seen at the paintings. But I think it's very, we never thought we are refugees. I don't, maybe it's, we still love Iraq. We really, even I didn't grow up there, but still, it's a very, I have a very warm feeling for Iraq. But maybe we don't consider ourselves as refugees because finally we came back home. It's not like the people, the Arab people here who was deported from here and they want to come back home. So we have very strong feeling for Iraq. We knew we had a very great culture we developed there. And but still we came back home. We feel here is our home. Well, we don't have any feeling like going to live back in Iraq. I think like talking about myself. So that's it. It was very nice to hear. It was a great pleasure that I met Sarah and we talked a lot about it. And yes, we have a great heritage over there.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That is really important. I think a really important insight to add to our discussion.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Yossa, as always.
And I hope the book also captures that. It is this push and pull. It's like, you know, there was something cosmic in the way suddenly so many Jews had to leave their homes to come to Israel. So yeah, it's definitely a very important point that Yossa's saying.
Absolutely.
Actually, this is the only community which in one piece, in about 1 year, all the community, 90% of the community arrived to Israel. Wow. And they were the first immigrators here in Israel. Just think about it, that when the Jewish Jewry, about 120,000 arrived to Israel, at the time Israel was about 600,000. It means more than 10% were new immigrators, which with no houses, no living in tents, and so the situation was very, very bad. But it was bad for everybody, so it's not so bad.
They all suffered together, that's for sure. Everyone was poor together. Everyone had nothing to eat together.
It's, as we always say, that is that's what we do. Any questions for Sarah from anyone? Estelle.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to thank Sarah, and I want to thank her so much for talking about this because, well, particularly in the Ashkenazi world, but generally, you know, we focus so much on Eastern European Jewry and what happened to them and the pogroms over the years and what happened, and we don't focus enough on this huge amount, you know, the huge Jewish community of North Africa and the Middle East. And this story of the Farhud and sort of virtually being expelled is not spoken about much. And the bits that I've read, I mean, Ben Gurion was in a panic because he said, they can't come. We haven't got anywhere to put them. And the tents haven't arrived. And, you know, and this sort of panic and the people of this small little community, which if you think about it, they were struggling themselves. They had just begun the state and and here there were hundreds of thousands of people pouring in, which they had to kind of see they had food and see they had medicines and see that. And this, I just sort of get over and over again, I get bowled over by the fortitude and the strength and the ability of Jewish people to just not feel sorry for themselves, you know, that not talking about themselves as refugees, thinking positively. No, we've come to Israel, and the people living in Israel saying, oh, we're going to welcome you. And it just, the whole attitude of Jewish people just never ceases to amaze me, how the sort of the inner strength and the positive thinking and the ability to overcome. You know,
that's really interesting, because that's actually true. Levi Eshkol came to Ben Gurion and said to him, there is no way we can take the Iraqi Jews. There is no way. And Shlomo Hillel tells this story. He was the Iraqi Jew who was responsible for for organizing Operation Ezra Nehemi with Mordechai ben Porat. And Ben Gurion, and so Levi Eshkol said this to Shlomo Hillel, and then Ben Gurion called Shlomo Hillel to him, and he said, there is no way we're not bringing them. We can't have another Shoah on our hands. You bring them. Even if we don't have housing, even if we don't have food, you bring them. And that was Ben Gurion's call. And they really were in a dangerous position. All the academics agree about this. And the reality in Israel was very harsh. I don't want to underestimate how hard the reality was in Israel for the refugees. It really wasn't. It wasn't all singing in horrors, and, you know, it was really, really tough on a personal and just from my family. But no one saw themselves as refugees. But you know what? The trauma's there. And then maybe that's something else I want to all leave you with, that's another thing about the Mizrahi story, which isn't spoken enough about, which is the trauma that happens within families because of things like this. And it definitely was overshadowed by the Shoah, which is, you know, there's no argument there, but it still has to be recognized, which is why I so appreciate you all being here today to mark this. And I really, appreciate you all being here.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining us. Yossa, thank you for your input as always. And it's just, it's been a wonderful hour, taking us to another place completely, both in terms of a book as well as in terms of history. So, Sarah, thank you again for your words, both on the page as well as right here on the Zoom.
Yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the reading.
Yes, we're going to, Sarah's also going to put together a little bit of she's got some extra reading, which we'll send out tomorrow with the recording. So if anyone's interested in reading a little bit more, they will get that. And as I said, those of you in South Africa will be receiving that book in a few months here in Kollel Bookshop, but otherwise you can get it on Amazon. Anyone who can't wait.
Book Depository
or Book Depository. Yes, or Book Depository. All right, so thank you all for joining us, and everyone should have a Laila Tov. Those of you in South Africa, have a good summer holidays.